How to Move the Stars by Jacob Lemansky. Chapter 3, France. March 24th, 2013, France. A woman arrived shortly before dawn and told Katie and I that we weren't allowed to be there. She's angry. A second man quickly arrived to send us away as well. Then I woke up. It was only a nightmare. I worry every night about being found. Before arriving in Spain, I was only vaguely aware of the Spanish siesta. Every afternoon, all the stores close while the workers go home to eat lunch and nap. For hours, small towns appear to be empty. I would appreciate the break as a worker, but as a consumer, I do not. Several times across Spain, Katie and I have biked through the morning only to arrive just after noon to a locked grocery store. In rural areas, the locked store might be the only one we pass all day. The restaurants would also be closed and wouldn't reopen until dark. We were left hungry, without food, and no place to buy more. This happened to us again today. For myself, the feeling of hunger is mostly disconnected from my mood, but for Katie's sake, I regretted that I didn't carry more supplies. Not unreasonably, she's perturbed every time we run out of food. If I had even a morsel, I would have given it to her, but I had nothing. Each time this has happened, I felt bad, but Katie never blamed me. Clearly at fault was the Spanish siestas. Rain began to fall on our final climb out of Spain. Starting from a stormy inlet, Katie and I ascended a serpentine road, sweeping gracefully to a ridgeline, marking the edge of France. We posed for a picture in front of the sign. Both of us were wearing our red raincoats and black rain pants. Behind us was France, lost in a cloud. Spain was a hard place to bike tour. The rain was persistent, and we had a lot of trouble finding places to sleep. The people were kind, but I never did feel comfortable seeing iron bars across the windows, a precaution that persisted throughout the whole country. As I rolled down from the ridge, I had high hopes that France would be better. Katie and I quickly arrived at a quaint village tucked between the mountains and the sea. The sky was beginning to get dark, and we needed a place to stay. The town seemed empty and shuttered, but fortunately for us, there was one open hotel. The woman at the front desk spoke to us in English with a thick French accent. The room cost much more than we had been paying in Spain, and I asked if there were other places we could check. She explained that the tourist season has not yet started, and that in many of the towns along the coast, the shops and hotels will all be closed. I hoped that France would be different from Spain, and it is. Their siestas last 6 months. March 25th, 2013, French coast. The rain passed in the night and we woke up to a wonderful day for biking. Katie and I pedaled out of town, back onto a winding mountain road that took us past vineyards and patches of scraggly forest. The higher we climbed, the more spectacular our view of the sea and coastline became. The tallest hills rose 1,000 feet above us, and some of them were cut with terraces, all the way to the top. By the afternoon, we had rolled down from the hills onto a plain of horse pastures, small farms, and dense coastal villages where every building was painted white and had red rooftops. The egalitarian colors were picturesque against the backdrop of the sea. However, my instinct is to resist what is normal. That's how I find myself bicycling around the world. And if I were to live in one of those white villages, I would struggle to not add a little color to my paint. I've been noticing that unlike in Spain, the windows no longer have iron security bars over them. The bars were put there to make people feel safe in their homes, but they made me feel like I was locked outside with the criminals. Buildings in France don't have this extra security. I'm surprised by how much safer I feel in a society that doesn't expect to be robbed. One of the coastal towns had a few open shops along the boardwalk. A clothing rack in front had the stereotypical French shirts with horizontal black and white stripes, like a mime would wear. I wondered if French people actually like those shirts, or if they are just for tourists. This evening, Katie and I crossed a bridge, then looped around under it to set up our hammocks in a patch of trees near the river. Someone was walking their dog when we got here, but they're gone now. The air is cool, and I have my sleeping bag zipped all the way up. Katie is in her hammock next to me. She told me she loved me. then fell fast asleep. March 26, 2013. Canal. Katie and I continued past farms and small towns as we crossed the French countryside. Where the road came up against the coast, we followed a narrow, 7-mile-long strip of land between the Gulf of Lion and a large salty lake. The place was built up with vacation homes, and beautiful tall hotels looked out over the pristine beaches. There were no vacationers though, and everywhere we went seemed rather quiet. Late in the day, we found a bike path along a canal that passed between two more salty lakes. The canal brought fresh water to the fields from the Aude River in the north, and also served as a means of transportation. The boats in the canals were particularly long, stretching for up to 80 feet while only being 12 feet wide, long enough that they could not possibly turn around in the narrow channel. Whichever direction they entered from would be the direction they point forever. The boats had a single deck on top, a flat bottom, and they were old. Many were in disrepair, with hulls painted half a dozen colors from rust spots being covered up over the years. Some of them had been converted into shabby homes. There must have been a heyday for traveling by canal, but clearly that time has passed. Katie and I smiled as we bicycled into the evening. The canal path had no cars for us to worry about, or even any other people. Our bikes rode easily over the packed gravel. Birds chirped and fluttered in the tall grass. Canals are incredibly flat, and we went for miles without the slightest hill. The full moon was rising, and the horizon was turning pink as we pedaled towards a forested hillside to find a place to sleep. We first followed a tractor path between trees in a farm field, but I couldn't find a spot for our hammocks. Looping back, we went to a ridge along a dirt road and set up camp where passing cars couldn't see us. Now, the moon is high in the sky, and so bright that I see the shadows of the trees casting across the forest floor. March 27, 2013. French farms. Katie and I were hanging close to each other in our separate hammocks last night, and shortly after we laid down, I heard her get up. She said her stomach was hurting, and she thought she had food poisoning. I looked out to see her curled up in a ball, lying on the ground in pain. I offered support from my hammock, but I was also tired, and soon fell asleep. This morning, Katie told me that she spent most of the night on the ground with a cramped stomach. She's feeling a little better though, good enough to get back on her bike. Our only option, really. And despite her rough night, we biked another 50 miles today. We rode through French farmland, past large vineyards and horse pastures. Another canal appeared with several of the long, narrow boats I saw yesterday. These ones were in much better condition. They had gardens on the decks, lawn furniture, and large living spaces below with windows looking out. I'm not called to live on a canal, but I could see the appeal for someone else. The day was gray and cloudy, and in the late afternoon, rain began to fall. We would have stopped, but we happened to be on a narrow, sandy strip of land between a 10-mile-long lagoon and the Gulf. There were no trees for our hammock, so we kept going. Next, we came to an industrial port, also without anywhere to sleep. Then we skirted past a town with no obvious hotels. By this point, there was barely enough light for us to be seen on the road. I was feeling desperate. We were moments away from being forced to sleep in a muddy farm field when we came upon a motel standing alone between towns. Katie spoke to the man at the front desk, and we got the last room, a small and simple affair, just large enough to fit us and our bikes. We brought our wet gear inside, then stripped off our dripping clothes. Katie's especially glad to skip another night camping in the rain. This room is not as exciting as sleeping on the ground in a storm, but we are dry, and in this bed, I get to have Katie keep me warm. March 28, 2013. Montpelier. We left the hotel this morning, back into another rainy day, but we didn't go far before pulling into an empty train station to sit under the awning. We've hardly had a dry day in the past 5 weeks, and Katie was feeling frustrated. Her giant rain pants were rolled down at the waist, and she was wearing the plastic bags over her shoes. She slumped back against the wall, looking miserable and pouting. I was in good spirits, but understood why she wasn't. We considered catching a train, but the schedule posted was in French, and as far as I could tell, no trains were coming anytime soon. Our only option was to keep going, but we decided not to go very far. Montpelier was only 8 miles down the road, and we found a hotel near the city center. Through the afternoon, we dried off and rested, then headed out to find dinner this evening. We ended up seated at a nice French restaurant next to a couple from London who spoke with a strong British accent. We chatted with them as we ate. Katie's stomach was still unsettled from the food poisoning. She tried to order vegetables, but the waiter didn't speak English. He went down the menu saying bœuf and pork. Vegetables were not the main course for anything. I ordered a pork shoulder, like the British woman sitting next to us. Hers was a huge chunk of meat that caused us all to laugh at the size. I was hungry and excited, but when mine came out, the portion was 1/3 the size. The flavor was fine, but I was disappointed the whole time. I wanted a big meal much more than I wanted one that tasted good. After dinner, we meandered through the city, walking beneath the streetlights back to the hotel. March 29th, 2013. Rest day. Katie and I took the day off in Montpelier. She needed a break from bicycling in the rain and had some work to do as well. I was happy to give my legs a day of rest, and with no responsibilities to attend to, I wrote a blog, read the internet, then went for a walk. I wandered the wet streets, admiring the old European architecture. The buildings were light yellow, white, or gray. I came upon a stone tower, a remnant of a fortification built 900 years ago. Further on, an open plaza appeared out of the dense inner city. In the middle was a beautiful fountain that had a statue of 3 women standing with their backs against each other. An opera house was there too, and I saw a few tourists out walking in the rain, but not many. On my way back to the hotel, I found a bakery with a delicious display of pastries, pies, custards, and Technicolor macaroons. I bought a loaf of bread for our dinner and a bright pink cookie to bring back to Katie. March 30th, 2013. Running with a bull. Katie and I were back to biking this morning. We headed out in the dreary weather, but after a day of rest, we were both in good spirits. In the early afternoon, we followed quiet, single-lane roads through drab gray towns. Pastures and farms filled in the land around us, and in one of the fields, we came upon a mare looking down at her newborn baby. The mother stayed close and nuzzled encouragement as the foal tried to stand for the very first time. In less than 10 minutes, the youngest horse in France was upright, balancing on long, gangly legs, wobbling as she took in the world for the very first time. I joined in the moment, looking around at the wet fields and overcast skies, trying to see everything with fresh eyes. Wherever I go on this journey, that will be the first time I am there. I must remember to arrive with the same overwhelming sense of wonder as a newborn horse. This evening, we arrived at the town of Arles. A festival was beginning, and the streets were filled in with people. At a tourist office, we learned that there would be a bull running event. I've seen videos of the famous running of the bulls in Pamplona, Spain, and I've long considered it something I would like to do. I asked the woman at the tourist office if I could participate. She looked dumbfounded that I would even want to. Across the center of town, a corridor had been constructed with a heavy metal fence with gaps large enough for a person to squeeze through. The bulls ran one at a time, with 6 cowboys on white horses corralling them as they went, 4 in the front and 1 on each side. A group of teenage boys then ran close behind, and after watching a couple of passes, I climbed through the fence to join. The crowd of chasers filled in around me as the big animals pounded the pavement ahead. I couldn't turn or slow down. I'd become part of the group, and we moved collectively. I was in a stampede. People cheered and banged the fences as we passed. 2 boys in front of me grabbed the bull's tail and pulled. Others jumped on the creature's flanks and held on. The big animal slowed, then stopped in the street. Some of the boys pulled out their smartphones, while the rest gathered in close to pose triumphantly with the bull, getting a picture of themselves with the animal's butt. After a moment, the bull shook everyone off and began to run again. The experience was exhilarating. The sun was long over the horizon by the time the festival ended, leaving Katie and I with the challenge of finding somewhere to sleep in a town already booked full for the festival. None of the hotels we tried had any vacancy, and finding a spot to sleep outside of town was going to be tough in the dark. I wasn't sure what we were going to do, and Katie spotted a sign for a campground that was tucked into a neighborhood at the edge of town. A friendly French man in his 50s greeted us at the gate. He had 1 spot left on a soggy patch of grass, and fortunately, there were 2 trees right there as well. Katie and I are sharing a hammock tonight, squeezing us tight together so that she's mostly on top of me. I don't mind though. I like when she's close to me. March 31st, 2013, Marseille. We left Arles after another long night, then watched as the day slowly became beautiful and warm. We returned to the coast across flat farmland, entering a lovely city along the water where a shipping canal cut through to a large inland lake. Flowers were blooming in the planters, small boats bobbed at their docks, and the sun was shining. I felt like spring had arrived. We carried on, following the rim of the lake before turning into the hills to the south. I felt good as I climbed. My legs seemed to always be tired, but they were getting stronger as well. Katie never complains about tired legs. She seems unfazed by all the biking. The hills weren't very tall, and I liked being in them. White stones poked through the grassy slopes. The scrubby bushes and patches of short trees seemed to be adapted for a drier climate. We rolled fast, coming down, descending right to the edge of the shining blue sea. 50 miles after starting our day, we arrived at the large city of Marseille. As we came into the suburbs, I admired the fancy homes and dozens of docks full of small leisure boats. Closer to the city, the waterfront became industrial with equipment for removing containers from cargo ships. We also passed an enormous cathedral made of white and black stones that form horizontal stripes up the whole building, just like the French shirts. Now I wonder if the shirt or the cathedral came first. We made our way downtown to the train station, figuring there would be places to stay near there, and after a short search, we got a private room in a hostel for the night. This is the nicest place we've stayed, though I wouldn't say it's better than anywhere we've slept outside. April 1st, 2013, resting in Marseille. We stayed an extra day in Marseille. Katie worked on her computer while I sat in bed resting my legs. This evening, we put on our shoes and took a stroll to see the sights. Known as the first city in France, the origin of Marseille dates back 2,600 years and is one of the oldest continuously habitated places in Europe. The long history has been repeatedly buried through the intervening thousands of years of construction. I could only imagine the interesting stories under my feet. Marseille was lively. The buildings were clean and interesting. Victorian-era architecture mixed with modern museums, theaters, and fine restaurants. We passed an opulent wharf full of yachts ranging from small to mega. Each incremental step up in size allowed the owner to feel superior to all the shorter boats, and whoever had the longest yacht was obviously the winner. Katie and I had fun exploring on foot. We discussed staying in the city tomorrow too, but one idle day seems to be all that I can take. I feel compelled to keep going. I can't circle the earth by being still. April 2nd, 2013. Into the countryside. The first grocery store we found in France had canned ravioli with sauce. Spain never had anything like that, and since we don't have a kitchen, a canned meal is perfect. I got out my spork and ate the cold pasta in the parking lot. Katie, on the other hand, was craving cooked vegetables. She headed straight for the hot bar, the first one since Portugal. We felt like we had entered the land of plenty. I've also taken to eating day-old French pastries. Every morning I search for a bakery to buy yesterday's products. A dozen pastries cost only a few euros, and I always finish them by the end of the day. I was hungry a lot in Spain, but in France, I'm gaining weight. For a change of pace, we headed away from the coast, which was a good choice. The mountains and farmland were lovely to bike through. The roads were quiet, and I appreciated seeing the differences between the touristic beach towns and the inland villages. Along the coast, the towns were all painted a beaming white, while in the countryside, the homes were the color of wet concrete. I found the drab shade suitable only for a rainy day, but as I came and went from the little communities, I began to see that the color fit the agrarian landscape quite well. The buildings looked natural, like a large gray stone on the edge of a field. French towns, both along the coast and in the countryside, had lawn bowling courts, or here in France, they call the game pétanque. As long as there was no rain, people were usually there, and Katie and I occasionally stopped to watch a match. Everyone was always friendly with each other, but I could tell they were serious about winning. Throughout the morning and again in the afternoon, we followed beautiful streams winding through the mountains, passing short white cliffs and old farmhouses. The wind pushed on our backs, helping us along. Across most of France, the wind has been pushing on our backs, which goes a long way in how much I like this country. We got pushed all the way to the town of Brignoles. This area has a lot of farmland, but there are also a lot of houses dispersed so regularly that we couldn't find anywhere to sneak away from the road. The sun was getting low, and I felt weary about getting caught in the dark without a place to camp. We decided to stay and found a hostel in town. The hostel is fine. We have our own room, and our bikes are locked in the lobby. Katie caught up on her work this evening, while I sat on the bed, finishing off my bag of day-old pastries. April 3rd, 2013. Katie. Katie initially planned on flying back to Colorado today, but she has decided to extend her trip for 2 more weeks. I'm glad she is staying. Over the past month and a half, we have hardly left each other's side. I feel grateful that I've gotten to share this experience, and I feel closer to her than when we started. This journey has challenged Katie, and I'm impressed by how resolutely she overcame her obstacles. She has proven her toughness, though not always without complaining. The biggest compromise we are both making is how often we sleep inside, which has been more than I would like, but Katie is resistant to spending the night in wet clothes or a wet sleeping bag, a request so reasonable that I don't try to argue. She's been a good teacher as well. I've watched her welcome the challenge of communicating and connecting with others. Whenever we meet anyone or need information, she's the one who takes the lead. My instinct has never been to chat with strangers, and prior to this trip, I've never had to talk to someone who doesn't speak English. Katie has shown me that very little of what is being said needs to be clearly understood. The message can be deduced from the pieces that get through, as well as nonverbal cues, in just reading the situation. This evening, we have found ourselves in another less than ideal camping situation. Our hammocks are hanging in a forest on a mountainside. Clouds drifted over as we began setting up, and fits of rain started just after dark. Now, gusts of wind are loudly slapping our rain fly like a whip. I told Katie I would do something about the noise, then went outside in the rain to make an adjustment. Crouching under my hammock, I waited for a gust of wind to test what I had done. I first tried pulling out the slack on the rainfly, but to no avail. Next, I tried cinching the fabric down with an elastic cord. I tested a few configurations, but none of them worked. After 40 minutes, I was out of ideas. I stuck my head into Katie's hammock, gave her a wet kiss, and admitted defeat. April 4th, 2013. Back to the sea. We were discovered camping this morning. An old man walking his dog came upon our hammocks as we were packing up to go. In French, he told us we can't camp there, then continued walking away, looking very upset. Our camp was halfway up a long climb, so first thing this morning, we continued to the top. My legs were tired and my thighs burned as I started uphill. The mountains were covered in thick green forest with sheer stone mounds poking up through the land, reaching even higher than the trees. The ridges around us rose to nearly 2,000 feet above sea level and edged into the clouds. We made our way through the hills on a winding road and passed a few small neighborhoods before descending to the coast of the Ligurian Sea. Katie and I followed the water's edge past 10 miles of beautiful homes, beaches, rows of fancy yachts, and the city of Cannes, famous for its film festival. The day was cloudy and damp. A cool rain was falling, and few people were outside. With no end in sight to the sprawl of second homes, Katie and I pulled into a hostel near the town of Antibes, another beautiful old city that embodies the opulence of southern France. We walked to a nice restaurant for dinner that did not have an English menu. To order, I simply pointed to one of the main courses. The waiter then asked me to order 2 more items. This isn't the first time French restaurants have asked me to keep ordering. Maybe I'm picking the sides, what dressing I want, or I'm being sold a dessert. I'm never sure. I go back to pointing at the menu until the waiter gives me a vicinity to aim for. Once I land on a sufficient answer, they note my selection, then have me pick a third random item. What I get served is a complete surprise to me. Tonight, I was brought a thin cut of beef and brown gravy with onion and a side of potatoes. I had made an excellent choice. April 5th, 2013. Monaco. Katie and I are now in the French Riviera, a famously beautiful and luxurious vacation area situated between low, rippling mountains and pristine beaches. Between the two natural boundaries are towering white condominiums lining the coast for miles. The road took us past a white stone cliff carved into an impressive 25-foot-tall statue of soldiers from the World War I. The monument is one of an estimated 176,000 war memorials built across France after the First World War. The statues were the natural reaction to the death of more than 1.5 million French soldiers and citizens. Now they serve as cultural memories, reminding future generations of the cruel tragedy of war. Because that didn't work, I also saw monuments from the Second World War. In the afternoon, we arrived in Monaco, the second smallest country in the world and the wealthiest per capita. The 2-mile-long territory is squeezed between beautiful white cliffs and the sparkling Ligurian Sea. There was no security where we entered, and in fact, a Ferrari dealership was straddling the border. The wealth of the place was obvious. Sharply dressed traffic police stood in the roundabouts, blowing on a whistle and pointing at cars with such animation that they seemed to be performing more than actually helping move traffic along. All the land that wasn't too steep to build on was filled in with luxurious apartment buildings. There were places where the road tunneled beneath the ground to make room for more buildings above, and at one point, the road spiraled upward like a corkscrew so that no land was wasted on a long ramp. We even bicycled on the Formula One racetrack that loops through the city. The asphalt was perfectly smooth. Katie and I stopped at a cafe by the harbor to share a chocolate croissant. The delicious pastry was appropriately expensive, and we ate while looking out at 100 opulent yachts bobbing in the sea. Everything in the city had a sheen of quality that could only be paid for. Tonight, we are sleeping high on a hill behind a neighborhood park. The sun is down, but we are still bathed in soft light. The opposing hillside is dotted with yellow streetlights. Lines of white headlights and red taillights move through the valley far below. The clouds above appear to radiate an eerie blue glow. There is only one spot for our hammock, so Katie and I will be sleeping tight against each other, which never bothers me.